So what does it look like if you have a secure attachment style? A secure attachment style is marked by having a high internal locus of control or feeling of safety. Do you feel like you are in control of your own emotions and what's going on around you and possibly in your environment, or that you have control over your emotions regardless of what's going on around you and in your environment? Are you confident in most situations? Do you have trust in most of your relationships? Sometimes if we find that we are navigating around an attachment style that is not as secure as we would like it to be, we want to take a look at the environment that we've placed ourselves in, because a lot of your attachment style has to do with what you surround yourself with, the environment that you're in, what you're feeding into your spirit. That goes for the friends that you hang out with, the media that you watch and consume, and then the way that you talk to yourself. So if you don't have a secure attachment style, you're more likely to feel like life is happening to you instead of feeling like you are the creator of your own destiny, or that you have influence in whether or not something works out for you. You're more likely to feel like, okay, well, if I study really hard for this test, I can probably do well, instead of feeling like no matter what I do, things aren't going to work out well because I'm not in control of anything, right? If I want things to go well for me, I'm basically at the mercy of other people in every aspect of my life. There's nothing that I can do, or very little that I can do, to impact the way that I want my life to go, or my success journey is not up to me. It's influenced by everyone around me. So as you might have guessed, a secure attachment style starts in childhood. If a child had parents or caregivers who had a healthy emotional bond with that child, if they were responsive, attentive, caring, compassionate, the child is more likely to grow up with a secure attachment style than a child who had non-attentive parents who maybe weren't very affectionate with the child. So if you're thinking, I didn't really have a secure bond with my parents growing up, but I would like to make sure that my child grows up with a more secure attachment style, what are some things you can do to facilitate that? So I have 5 tips that I'm going to share with you guys today on how to foster a healthy, secure attachment style with your child. Tip number 1 is being attentive. It's actually different from just hearing, right, what your child is saying, but actually listening to understand what's going on and not assuming. So often we might have a parent where we're having a child that maybe they have behavioral issues, or maybe they seem stressed out lately, or depressed or anxious, and you're not sure what to do about that. That maybe they're having difficulty in school. Instead of just looking at the result, instead of looking at the behavior of what's going on and then the consequences of what's going on, to try to understand why what's going on, what's taking place is happening. What's the cause of the behavior that you're seeing? So you, instead of assuming, oh, my kid's not studying because they're lazy, to ask them, what's going on with your studies? Why aren't you doing your homework lately? And to take the time to let them know it's a safe space for them to share that information with you. Because often what we tend to do when there's a conflict is to assume that we understand where the other person is coming from, instead of taking the time to ask them without judgment and then listen. Tip number 2. Tip number 2 is to manage your stress. As a caregiver or as a parent, part of our role in parenting is being a role model. We're showing our child how to interact with the rest of the world by example. So no matter how much you can say to a child, do as I say and not as I do, there's still some classical conditioning going on there. There's still some subconscious training that's taking place when they're observing your behavior. So if you're upset or something stressful happens, you're yelling, you're holding your breath, you're upset, you're showing symptoms of anxiety, that's what the child is learning. This is how we handle stress, or this is how we handle challenging situations or circumstances. When there's a conflict, we run away, or if something happens and maybe I'm not sure what the end result of this is going to be, I am panicking. If you have a habit of panicking when there's a stressful situation, then your child learns that's the appropriate response to stress. So if you can learn tips and tools to manage your stress effectively, that will help your child to learn to manage their stress effectively. Tip number 3. Tip number 3 is to communicate effectively. My husband likes to say it's okay to feel your feelings. I know for a long time I had a habit of bottling my feelings up inside because I didn't want to lash out if I was upset. I didn't want to say the wrong thing and hurt someone's feelings. And it's a good thing to have self-control. But at the same time, it is okay to feel your feelings, and we want to make sure that we're expressing those feelings in a healthy, proactive way. In order to do that, we have to be able to have conversations. So by teaching your child it's okay to feel your feelings, you want to communicate those feelings in an appropriate, healthy, respectful way where we are not calling names, we are not yelling at people, we are not speaking to them in a condescending fashion, but we are communicating to understand where the other person is coming from and then try to reach some kind of agreement. So we're trying to understand how other people are feeling, and we're trying to make sure that we're expressing our feelings as well, and that the communication is respectful. Sometimes that might mean leaving if you're too upset in the moment to talk about the thing, and then coming back later to have that conversation. But if you teach your child that it's okay, it's okay to get upset sometimes, or if someone hurts your feelings, to feel sad, and it's okay to communicate that, and that there's a right response to the wrong behavior. By having the right response, you can improve the outcome of that conversation or the conflict and come to a resolution. Tip number 4. Tip number 4 is to give your child feedback. And it's important to note that this needs to be not just negative feedback or what some people might consider to be, quote unquote, constructive criticism. Because sometimes constructive criticism can just be critical. Sometimes it can be received as being overly harsh, especially if, even 50% of your conversations with the other person are what they did wrong or what they could have done better. To make sure it's more of a 60-40 ratio or a 90-10, where 90% of the things that you tell your child are I really like the way you did this. Their room is messy and they, pick up a sock off the floor. You can say, oh, thank you for picking your socks up off the floor. So to focus more on the positive things that they're doing than on the negative. And sometimes we'll have situations where they did do something wrong, but to let them know that you believe they're competent and capable of doing a good job, right? That you trust them to make good choices, and that they're capable of making good choices, that you see them and acknowledge the good choices that they make. That goes a long way to helping your child form a secure attachment style. I know Jay Shetty has a saying that he says so often, I'm not who I think I am, I'm not who you think I am who I think you think I am. And I feel like that's so profound, especially when we're looking at the child caregiver relationship because they're looking to you to help them form their identity of themselves. So even if they're not quite there yet, they need to know that you see them getting there, right? That you see them as on their way. So then another tool in that same vein would be allowing your child to see you receiving criticism constructively or feedback constructively. So allow your child the opportunity to critique your work or what you're doing or offer you feedback. Say maybe you're making a cake together and you put the frosting on. You can ask them, how did I do with that? What should I do different? Asking for their input. This can be beneficial to the child on multiple levels. First, it allows them to see that you value their opinion, that they can make decisions. You're not just the only one who can offer feedback, that they can offer feedback as well. Their input has meaning, that it has relevance, that it's important to you, that you care. And then it also shows them how to respond to constructive criticism or how to respond to feedback. If your child says, oh, that's an ugly cake, maybe, or like, I don't like the way you missed a spot on the frosting. You're like, oh man, okay, that's okay, I'll do better next time. And then you fix it and you ask them, okay, is that better? And they say yes. Or if you notice maybe your child is a little bit harsh with your criticism, that might be an opportunity for you to take a look at where they're learning that behavior from. Is it from you? Is it from your partner? And then you want to display to them appropriate ways to respond, right? An appropriate way to build someone up. So if their response is harsh, then you can create another opportunity where you can offer them a more loving critique so they can learn how it feels, right? How it feels to be loved well, how it feels to have healthy communication in a relationship, what that feels like, what that looks like, and how that makes them feel. Tip number 5. Tip number 5 is to encourage the child to reflect and understand their own emotions. So maybe we're upset, right? You can encourage a child to take ownership of their emotions. And we can also do this through modeling. Oh, I spilled the milk all over the floor. Mommy's kind of upset right now. That's okay. And you can say that out loud. I'm upset right now. I'm a little upset right now. That's okay. Or, oh man, or you find out that your child lied to you. You say, oh man, I wish I'm a little bit frustrated right now. I love you, but I'm a little bit frustrated right now. And if you need to take a break from that conversation and come back, to make sure to communicate that to your child, that to let them know that it's okay to not be happy all the time. Sometimes we're going to get upset, or we're going to be angry, or we're going to feel sad, right? Or anxious or stressed out, and it's okay. But allowing them that safe space to acknowledge their emotions creates room for them to then analyze their emotions, right? And decide whether or not this is beneficial, whether or not they're overreacting to something, or whether or not we need to consider shifting our perspective, or if there's another way to look at something so that we can deal with it effectively. When we label our emotions as not being okay, right? We reject that it's not okay for me to be. And sometimes we can do this on the other end of the spectrum, where you have parents who say, you have to be happy all the time. And then sometimes we're trained that it's not okay for us to be happy. But acknowledging that it's okay to feel however you're feeling then gives you room to, instead of us not acknowledging the feeling altogether and pretending that nothing's going wrong, that allows us room to say, okay, it's okay that I'm feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? And then we can work on starting to heal that. And you can do your own inner work, and you can also work with the counselor. But if you refuse to acknowledge what's going on, because it's not okay for you to feel your feelings. It's not okay for you to be happy. It's not okay for you to be angry. Then there's no room for you to work on it. There's no room for you to work on something if you won't acknowledge that it exists, if you don't acknowledge that this feeling is happening. So that's another way that you can help your child to develop a secure attachment style, is by allowing them to acknowledge that they're feeling their feelings and let them know it's okay, and give them room to understand what's triggering those emotions. Okay, so maybe you're thinking, that's great, Veronica, that, maybe one day we can all teach our children how to grow up with secure attachment styles and everything will be hunky-dory. But in the meantime, what about me? Maybe you're thinking, I'm an adult and I don't have a secure attachment style. Is it too late for me to change? In other words, can you change your attachment style? We talked about this before, and the answer is yes. It's difficult, but you can change your attachment style. I did a class on this a little bit over a week ago with another coach, and basically it boils down to your habits. You want to take a look at where you are now, how you got there, and then where you want to be. Sometimes that might mean working with a counselor or a therapist. But the good news is that if you give yourself the opportunity and you put in the work, you can develop a healthy, secure attachment style. So before I let you guys go, I'm going to give you 5 tips to help you develop a more secure attachment style. Tip number 1, you want to develop a healthy self-esteem. So there are lots of little things that we can do to improve our self-esteem. One of them we talk about a lot on this channel is keeping the promises and commitments that you make to yourself. Another way to improve your self-esteem is by taking care of yourself, taking care of your physical body and taking care of your physical health, as well as taking care of your mental health. So we're looking at going for a walk, making sure that we stay active. Maybe that's going for a gym or a run if you're a runner. But to do things for yourself that show you love yourself, that show you love God and you honor the body that God has given to you. And we do that by stewarding our body well, by making sure that we're moving, making sure that we're putting healthy food into our bodies. I know one of the biggest issues I ran into with my weight loss journey was a lot of it, for a long time, it wasn't about taking care of me. It was just about making sure that I was a certain weight when I stepped onto the scale, or making sure that on the outside I looked attractive to other people. It didn't matter if, I was eating a ton of sugar or I wasn't drinking enough water. But then, as I started to focus more on my relationship with the Lord, and I started focusing more on honoring my body, even when I was on a diet, it was more to make sure that I was feeding my body well and treating my body respectfully over losing weight. And then once I shifted that perspective, the pounds started to drop off, and it became so much less stressful because I was focused on loving myself by treating myself well, instead of loving myself for being a certain size. Yeah, another thing that can help with building good self-esteem is making sure that you monitor your self-talk and who you allow into your circle of influence, how they're speaking to you, right? We want to be spending time with people who are pouring into us in a positive way and filling up our cup, where we can also fill up their cup, instead of having relationships where we're constantly tearing each other down. That can weigh heavy on your self-esteem. Tip number 2. Tip number 2 is being comfortable with intimacy. People who have difficulty loving themselves typically find it difficult to allow other people to love them. So that's why tip number 1 is improving your own self-esteem. And then tip number 2 is being comfortable with intimacy. Can you tell yourself, I love you? Could you give yourself a hug if no one was looking? Or does that feel cringy? Is it hard for you to allow someone to praise you or to get close to you? Part of having a secure attachment style is knowing that you are going to be safe even if you allow yourself to be vulnerable in relationships with people that you should be able to trust, right? These aren't people in your life that you shouldn't be trusting, people who might be feeding into a toxic environment or might be playing a toxic role in your life. These are people who you know they're supportive of you, you know that they love and care for you, but for some reason you're still having trouble opening up with them. You're still having trouble letting them in. So we want to work on that. So developing a healthy self-esteem, and then intimacy. That brings us to tip number 3. Tip number 3 is all about communication. So if something bothers you, can you vocalize it? Can you vocalize it to yourself to start maybe? Sometimes we have a secure attachment style. It might be hard for us to admit that we're bothered by something. So you want to be able to have those serious conversations and be honest with yourself. And then it's easier to then turn around and have those types of conversations with other people. All confrontation does not have to result in conflict. Sometimes confrontation can be a positive thing. Sometimes taking the time to talk about what is on our mind, how we're feeling, can be beneficial to both parties, to all parties involved in that conversation. Tip number 4. Tip number 4 is empathy. Are you able to look outside of yourself in any given situation? Maybe somebody's frustrated about something, or they're sad, or they're angry, and to work on not attaching other people's emotions to you, while at the same time being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. To be able to understand their perspective, even though you don't have to own their perspective or make their feelings your own, right? Just because I can understand that something might cause someone to be upset or that it might make them angry doesn't mean that I need to shift into that energy myself. But by taking the time to try to understand how someone else is feeling, by being empathetic, I can create space for them to process their own emotions. And then hopefully we can relate to them better because we have a better understanding of where they're coming from. Tip number 5. Tip number 5 is developing positive coping skills. So while we might be able to make our best effort to have positive communication and interaction with other people, and we can make an effort to have positive communication and positive relationship with ourselves, things still won't always go according to plan. People have their own minds and their own opinions. People have their own baggage that they're working with. You might be out in the real world and you'll come into situations where there's a conflict that you can't resolve. You can't force someone to feel a certain way. And even in those situations, to make peace with yourself, to make peace with that within yourself. So even though everybody's not going to like me, to know, okay, I like myself. Even if you're in an environment with someone, maybe they're yelling or they're screaming, or you're thinking, oh, I don't know how to relate to my partner right now, and I can't solve this problem right this minute. What tools do you have in your toolbox to deal with that so that you're not allowing that stress to latch onto you and stick to you for hours after, or days or months or years? So, in answer to the earlier question, it is possible for you to change your attachment style. If you put in the effort, it is possible for you to grow to have a healthier, more secure attachment style. So that's good news. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave those down below. I always love hearing from you. If you have any topics that you would like for us to discuss in future episodes, please let me know that as well. And then I wanted to leave you guys with a Bible verse from Psalms chapter 7, verse 9 on secure attachment. Let the evil within wicked people come to an end, but make the righteous person secure. O righteous God who examines all thoughts and emotions. So if you have a secure attachment style, right? If you've grown up in environments where you didn't know what your identity was, right? Or maybe you had a skewed identity because it was filtered through the lens of someone who didn't value you the way that God values you. When we start to live our lives according to God's will and God's purpose for our lives, we can begin to see ourselves the way that Christ sees us. There is secure attachment in that relationship. I love you guys so much. Yep, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Bye, guys.